It wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a 1,000-mile artery pumping life back into the cold, necrotic heart of a dying continent. How did a scrap of paper and a fleet of rusted bicycles outmaneuver the most sophisticated killing machine in human history? Why did the British High Command treat their elite pilots as mere ghosts in the machine, while the enemy treated them as huntable prey? And why did the world's greatest intelligence network surrender to the word impossible, while a 24-year-old nurse refused to even blink? But history looked at the grand maps, missing the shadow walking through the rain. Her name was Andrée de Jongh. To the occupiers, she was a non-entity, just a girl in a nurse's uniform. To the hunted, she was the little Cyclone. Why did the British Empire ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog. Why, to help us uncover the rest of the story, please subscribe. August 1941, Brussels. The city is a cage of gray stone and swastikas. The air smells of coal smoke, stale beer, and the metallic tang of fear. To walk the streets of occupied Belgium is to navigate a labyrinth where the walls have ears and the pavement is slick with the sweat of the hunted. Above, the sky is no longer a blue expanse of freedom. It is a graveyard of fire and falling metal. British bombers, the great Lancasters and Halifaxes, fall from the clouds like wounded birds, their aluminum skins shredded by flak. The crews who survive the descent find themselves in a waking nightmare. They bail out into a landscape where every window is a potential trap. They are men trained for the cockpit, not the shadows. They speak no French. They have no civilian clothes, and their heavy flight boots click-clack against the cobblestones, like a rhythmic confession of their identity. In London, the generals look at the maps. They see the iron curtain of the occupation, and they see a mathematical certainty. Any pilot downed over Belgium is already dead or a prisoner. They call these men lost causes. The system dictates that the cost of recovery outweighs the value of the human life. To the High Command, a pilot is a line item in a ledger, and once that line is crossed out, they move on to the next. But Andrée de Jongh does not believe in the mathematics of generals. She is 24. She is a nurse. Her hands are accustomed to the tactile reality of wounds, the warmth of blood, and the heavy silence of the dying. She does not deal in the abstract lines of a map. She deals in the survival of the individual. While the British High Command sits in cushioned chairs in Whitehall, debating the inevitable, Andrée is in a basement in Brussels, hunched over a sewing machine. She is meticulously removing the labels from civilian jackets. She is dyeing shirts in tubs of tea to make them look worn. She is forging identity cards with a precision that would make a master engraver weep. She realizes the fatal flaw in the German machine. It is a monster of scale. The occupiers are obsessed with the grand gesture, the armored checkpoints, the massive troop movements, the heavy artillery. They are looking for an army of saboteurs. They are looking for a military threat. They are not looking for a young woman with a bicycle and a defiant, quiet smile. She decides to build a railroad without tracks. It begins with a single soldier, a man the system had already written off as a statistic. His name is James Cromer, a young Scotsman who had fallen from the sky and found himself shivering in a Belgian barn. The British authorities told him to hide and wait for a liberation that was years away. Andrée told him to stand up. She does not wait for orders from London. She does not ask for permission from the local resistance leaders who scoff at the idea of a girl leading men across borders. She simply begins to walk. She takes Cromar and 2 others. They travel by train, by bicycle, and eventually by foot. They move through the Zone Interdict, the forbidden coastal strip where the German presence is a suffocating blanket. Every bridge is a gamble. Every train station is a stage where Andrée must play the role of the innocent traveler, her heart hammering against her ribs while her face remains a mask of calm. The journey is 1,000 miles of calculated risk. It ends at the British consulate in Bilbao, Spain. The establishment meets her there in the person of a British official. We can see him now, sitting behind a mahogany desk, the air thick with the smell of expensive tobacco and the crystallized arrogance of rank. He looks at Andrée through a veil of smoke and institutional disbelief. He sees a girl with dust on her hem and mud on her shoes, a girl who should be tending to fevers in a ward, not navigating the gears of a global war. He looks at the 3 men she has brought with her. They are haggard, thin, but they are alive. "You expect us to fund this?" his silence seems to ask. He treats her arrival not as a miracle, but as a nuisance, a breach of protocol. The manual says the border is closed. The manual says the Pyrenees are an impassable wall of ice and German patrols. The manual says a girl with a bicycle cannot defeat the Third Reich. But Andrée does not argue. She does not need to. The presence of the men, breathing, standing, returned from the dead, is the only proof she offers. She calls it the Comet Line. The mechanism of the line is deceptively simple, functioning like a siphon pulling fluid from a poisoned well. Input: a downed airman is found in a Belgian field, his parachute a white flag of surrender. The fatal flaw: the Germans rely on rigid checkpoints and paper trails. They expect people to move where they are told. The black box: a decentralized network of safehouses, closets, attics, and coal cellars, connected by conveyors who speak in code and move in the gaps of the German patrol schedule. Output: the airman is moved, soul by soul, across 3 borders to the safety of neutral Spain. If a single link in this human chain breaks, the result is not a mechanical failure. It is the firing squad. The Gestapo does not take comets prisoner for long. They turn them into ghosts. While the British intelligence apparatus screamed in panic over the loss of their elite crews, Andrée was already in the dark, holding the silence that would save them. She understood what the experts did not, that the most powerful system is often the most fragile, and that 1,000 miles of occupied territory can be crossed 1 heartbeat at a time. But as the Comet Line begins to grow, so does the shadow of the hunter. The German Abwehr and the Gestapo are not stupid. They begin to notice a pattern, a slow leak in their cage. They begin to hear whispers of a little cyclone who moves through the rain. The directors of the occupation dismiss the initial reports. They believe their security is too tight to fail. They believe the resistance is a group of disgruntled men in berets, not a nurse with a map hidden in her bra. But the geography of war respects no ego. While the German commanders toast to their impenetrable Atlantic wall, a microscopic fracture, the will of a single woman, begins to unzip the occupation. Andrée is preparing for her next crossing. She does not know that the mountains are waiting. She does not know that the snow is deep enough to swallow a man whole. She only knows that the sky is still falling, and she is the only one holding it up. December 1942. The Basque countryside. The cobblestones of Brussels are 1,000 miles behind. Here, the world is no longer gray and vertical. It is bone white and jagged. We are at the teeth of the Pyrenees, the final brutal wall between the cage of occupied Europe and the relative sanctuary of Spain. The air here doesn't just bite, it carves. It is a thin, lung-burning ether that turns breath into ghosts. Andrée de Jongh, known now by the codename Dédée, stands at the base of a vertical nightmare. Behind her are the men she is sworn to save. They are elite fighter pilots. They are paratroopers. They are the physical peak of the Allied war effort. Men with broad shoulders and hands calloused by the controls of Spitfires. They are twice her size, half her age and experience, and currently, they are shattered. There is a cruel irony in the human body. These men are trained to endure the G-forces of a dogfight and the sub-zero temperatures of a cockpit at 30,000 feet. But on the ground, stripped of their machines, they are remarkably fragile. They collapse in the waist-deep snow, their lungs screaming for an oxygen the mountain refuses to give. Dédée watches them. She does not offer a soldier's bark or a general's command. She offers the quiet, steady gaze of a nurse who has seen the limit of human endurance and knows that the mind always breaks long before the muscle. While the German border guards, the Grenzaufsichtstelle, rely on their dogs, their thermal layers, and their fixed mountain huts, Dédée relies on a different kind of architecture. She sees the mountain not as a barrier, but as a series of blind spots. The mechanism of death, here, is simple physics. It is the fatal flaw of the human thermal regulator. When the core temperature drops, the brain begins to lie to you. It tells you to sit. It tells you that the snow is a warm blanket. To the experts in Berlin, the Pyrenees in winter are a natural executioner. The military mind of the Reich is fixed on a singular hubris. They believe that because they cannot patrol the high passes in a blizzard, no one can cross them. They treat the weather as a junior officer, a loyal servant of the occupation. But they have fundamentally misunderstood the little cyclone. Dédée doesn't fight the mountain. She moves through it like water through a microscopic fracture in a dam. She knows the rhythm of the Basque smugglers, the men who have traded across these peaks for centuries, ignoring the imaginary lines drawn by kings and dictators. She adopts their gait. She adopts their silence. She is currently on her 24th crossing. By the time this winter ends, she will have completed 33. Think of the distance. Think of the repetition. Each trip is a 3-day trek over some of the most unforgiving terrain on the planet, followed by a train ride back into the heart of the enemy's territory to start again. While the system of the British military is still debating whether the Comet Line is a viable asset, Dédée is physically pulling the lost causes over the roof of the world. There's a moment, halfway up a nameless ridge, where the wind reaches a crescendo, a physical wall of sound that threatens to push the men off the ledge. One pilot, a man who has shot down 5 Messerschmitts, sinks to his knees. He is done. He tells her to leave him. He tells her he is a dead weight. This is the eureka moment. the point where the hero's background changes the course of history. A soldier might have left him. A strategist might have calculated the risk to the group and moved on. But Andrée is a nurse. She approaches the pilot not as a commanding officer, but as a practitioner of the human spirit. She leans in close, her breath warm against his frozen ear, and whispers a truth that no manual could contain. "The mountain only wins if you agree with it," she says. She takes his pack, she takes his arm, and she begins to walk. This is the ghost in the machine in action. While the Gestapo is busy raids in Paris and Brussels, searching for a network of military spies, Andrée is here, in the white silence, proving that the most effective weapon in the war isn't a bomb. It's a woman who refuses to acknowledge the word stop. But the system is finally beginning to wake up. In a heated office in Bayonne, a German colonel scoffs at the reports of a woman leading pilots over the peaks. He treats the mountain as his private fortress. "No human can survive the passes in this storm," he tells his subordinates. "If they are up there, the snow has already buried them. We don't need to hunt ghosts. We only need to wait for the spring to find the bodies." He treated the silence of the peaks as submission. He believed the elements were on his payroll, but he had fatally underestimated the little cyclone. It wasn't surrender, it was a rhythmic, relentless pulse, a 1,000-mile heartbeat that was slowly draining his prisons of their most valuable prizes. While he toasted to the security of his borders, the very men he sought were already tasting the salt air of the Spanish coast, guided by a shadow they would never forget. The danger, however, is no longer just the cold. The Comet Line has grown too large. It has become a victim of its own brilliance. The system of the resistance is a messy human thing, and humans are prone to the three great failures: greed, fear, and the loose tongue. The Gestapo has stopped looking for an army. They have started looking for a nurse. Dédée can feel the net tightening. Each crossing feels a little more crowded. Each safe house feels a little less safe. The air in the valley below the mountains has changed. It smells of wet wool and betrayal. She has a choice. She could stop. She has already saved more lives than any 10 men in the resistance combined. She could melt into the Spanish countryside and wait for the end of the war. But as she looks back at the men shivering in the dark, she realizes she is no longer just a nurse. She is the bridge. And a bridge does not choose when to stand. She turns her face back toward the wind. The next group is waiting in Brussels. The lost causes are calling. But as she descends into the mist of occupied France, a single rain-slicked farmhouse in Urugne is waiting for her. And inside that house, the laughter is about to stop. January 15th, 1943. Urugne, occupied France. The rain is a relentless, cold drumming on the roof of a farmhouse called Bidegain-Berry. It is a sound that usually brings comfort to Dédée. Rain hides the sound of footsteps. Rain keeps the German patrols in their barracks. But tonight, the rain feels heavy, like a shroud. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of wet wool and the sharp, acidic tang of adrenaline. Dédée is exhausted. Her boots are still caked with the mud of the Pyrenees. Behind her, 3 more airmen are huddled in the shadows, their eyes darting toward the door every time a branch scrapes against the window. They are so close. Spain is a silhouette against the lightning. One more push. One more night of holding the silence. Then the world breaks. The door doesn't just open, it splinters. The system arrives in a cacophony of hobnailed boots and shouted commands. The Gestapo, they don't come with questions. They come with the crushing weight of a trap that has been closing for months. A betrayal, a single link in the human chain that snapped under the pressure of greed or torture, has delivered the little cyclone into their hands. In this moment, the establishment is personified by a Gestapo officer. We can see him, his leather coat slick with rain, his face a mask of cold, bureaucratic triumph. He looks at the room full of elite Allied pilots, and then he looks at the frail, mud-streaked woman standing at the center. He laughs. He does not see a mastermind. He does not see the architect of the most successful escape network in the history of the war. He sees a girl who looks like she should be folding linens in a hospital. "Where is the leader?" he demands, his voice dripping with the crystallized arrogance of his era. "Where is the man who runs the Comet Line?" Andrée steps forward. Her voice is a whisper, but it cuts through the chaos. "I am the leader. There is no one else." The officer mocks her. He strikes her. To him, the idea of a woman possessing the strategic genius to outwit the Abwehr for 2 years is a physical impossibility. He believes the manual of gender roles more than he believes his own eyes. "They claimed that the Comet Line was a military operation," he might have sneered. "And they expect me to believe it was run by a nurse who barely weighs 100 pounds? This prejudice, this profound systemic blindness, becomes the fatal flaw that inadvertently saves her life. Because the Gestapo refuses to believe she is the little cyclone, they do not execute her immediately as a high-value saboteur. They treat her as a minor courier, a useful idiot for the real men they believe are still hiding in the shadows. They send her to Ravensbrück. The mechanism of the concentration camp is a black box of industrial erasure. Input: a human being with a name and a history. The mechanic of death: a system designed to weaponize starvation and labor. 1 top of 2 kilograms of bread a week, 16-hour shifts in the freezing mud, and a systematic stripping of the ego until only a number remains. Output: the raw material of human life is processed into ash. While the system of the Third Reich attempted to grind her into nothingness, Andrée was already in the dark, holding the silence that would save the women around her. Even in the camp, she became a pillar. She used her training as a nurse to tend to the dying in secret. She shared her meager rations. She whispered the stories of the mountain to those who had forgotten what air felt like. The Gestapo waited for her to break. They waited for her to reveal the real leaders. But Dédée was the only leader there was. She endured the beatings, the typhus, and the slow, agonizing crawl of the months, shielded by the very arrogance of the men who tortured her. They could not kill what they chose not to see. April 1945. The gates of Ravensbrück are torn open. The war is over. The great machines of the Reich have collapsed into rust and rubble. The generals who laughed at her are now ghosts or fugitives. Dédée emerges from the nightmare. She is a shadow of the woman who first walked into the British consulate in 1941. She is skeletal, her health broken, her youth stolen by the camps. She returns to a world that wants to celebrate the big victories. They talk about D-Day. They talk about the firebombing of Dresden. They talk about the men who flew the planes. but Andrée de Jongh remains a ghost in the grand narratives. She survives to see the peace, but she does not seek the spotlight. She goes back to being a nurse. She moves to Ethiopia, then the Congo, spending the rest of her life tending to lepers, people the world once again deemed lost causes. The bitter victory is this: the hundreds of men she saved went home to medals and parades. They became the faces of the greatest generation. But the woman who carried them over the teeth of the Pyrenees, the one who outlived the very storm she ignited, was largely forgotten by the history books for decades. We see this same hubris in our society today. We still look for power in the loud, the massive, and the heavily armed. We still dismiss the nurse with the bicycle until the system fails and we realize she was the only one with the map. The story of the little cyclone is a mirror. It asks us, who are the invisible agents of change we are ignoring right now? What impossible borders are being crossed while the experts are busy looking the other way? History is not made by the systems. It is made by the friction between the human spirit and the machine. And sometimes that spirit is a 24-year-old girl, standing in the rain, refusing to let the sky fall. If you believe that stories like Andrée de Jongh's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing and like this video. It is the only way we can ensure these voices are never silenced again. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.